Sea bass are a great fish to fish for, and it's coming up to the time of year when I start to fish for them with lures both from the shore and from the kayak in a variety of different ways. Drifting or trolling from the kayak, fishing over shallow rough ground, or from rocky outcrops from the shore are all enjoyable ways of targeting bass. The problem I find with lures is that they are great when new, but of course with plenty of usage, the hooks rust on the plugs and the jig heads. To get ready for the season, I need to make up some new soft plastics with jig heads and soft plastics with weedless hooks. Last year I experimented with plug-in single hooks on my plugs as opposed to trebles, and I'm going to put some new plug-in single hooks on my old plugs and replace trebles with single hooks on some new plugs, which is something I often receive questions about, such as what size single hooks I use. This video is about getting those lures ready for the coming season, and I hope you find it useful for your own lure fishing. Right, so what we're going to do, I've got these old plugs stripped down, and we're going to replace them with Decoy plug-in single hooks. Got a couple of new plugs here. This is a Tucker House Feed Shallow 105, and this is the Feed Shallow 128, new ones that are already replaced with single hooks. Now, as I said in the introduction, I get questions, having put the video out last year where I was experimenting with single hooks, I've received questions from people asking what size single hooks to use. Now, it very much depends on the size of the plug and whether it's whether originally it was a 3 treble plug or a 2 treble plug. So we've got the Feed Shallow there and the IMA Komomo, which is originally is a 3 treble plug. And the size of the trebles is usually about number 2, size 2 for the Feed Shallow. But we've got a IMA salt skimmer here, a surface walk the dog plug, which only comes with 2 trebles. Now the thing you've got to be careful of when you're replacing trebles with singles is when you put the single hooks on, that they don't overlap and tangle. And what I mean by that, this is one that I've already done, is that, hopefully you can see there, that if you're going to put 3 single hooks, replace 3 trebles with 3 single hooks, you can't put the single hooks on that are too big where the points, these points here, can easily hook round the neighbouring hook, the hook next to it. Because believe me, when you're casting, you'll get away with it a few times, but then you'll suddenly find that these have interlocked like that. So what I find, and it very much depends on like I said, it very much depends on the size of the plug. Taking this Feed Shallow 128 as an example, if I'm going to replace it with 3 single hooks, what I find size 2 Decoy plug-in single hooks are fine. You don't tend to get the interlocking. They don't the points, they don't cross over enough for them to get tangled. So that's really important. But if I was to put, say, 3 1/0 hooks on this or 3 2/0 hooks, they're just going to get tangled. So that's really important. Particularly if you don't notice it, you're casting out with hooks that are tangled up, and then you get a take from a bass and you don't hook it. Now the other option, if your particular plug that you're using is a 3 treble plug and you cannot put plug-in single hooks on without them overlapping, is to do away with one of the hooks and just put 2 hooks on. And what you can do then, you can then have larger hooks. You can have maybe a 2/0 at the head there and a 2/0 at the tail. And of course, because they're so far apart, they're not, and just do away with the middle hook. And because they're so far apart, they're not going to get tangled. So that's what I tend to do. I'll either have, on this particular, I have 3 size number 2s, or I'll have 2 2.0s, and I find that works fine. But when it comes to 2 treble plugs like this IMA salt skimmer, then what I tend to do is put 2 2.0s on, and of course they don't tangle because there's only only originally came with 2 trebles. And we've got an example here. This is not a surface, this is the feed shallow 105, and it came with 2 size 2 trebles, and I put 2 size 2.0 single hooks on, and of course because they're so far apart, they don't come anywhere near each other, and that works great. I find with two treble plugs, 2 2.0s, with 3 treble plugs, 3 2s, or 2 2.0s, and I find that works fine. But of course it depends on the plugs that you're using and the size of the plugs. So hopefully that answers 1 or 2 questions that I received of what size singles to use. Now the other thing I will say about replacing singles is the way you put the single hook on. If you notice there, when that hangs down, and obviously that's the way that it's going to be going through the water, the point of the hook, I put the hook on so that the point of the hook is not pointing towards the body, so that when a bass comes along, there's plenty of grabs it, there's plenty of hook point. If you have it the other way round, where you've got the hook pointed towards the body, then that's not a good idea. So that's just something else to think about when you're actually putting singles on. Okay, I've got my plugs done now, old and new, and replaced with the plug-in single hooks of different sizes. Now I know some of you that didn't see my videos from last year where I first mentioned replacing trebles with single hooks will be maybe asking the question, why bother with this? Why go through all this hassle? Why not just carry on with trebles? Well, of course you can, but it's very much a personal thing, and I do it for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that trebles can do a lot of damage to fish that you want to return, and they can also do you a lot of damage when you're dealing with a struggling fish. And I just find that singles do the fish less damage. As I said, fish, not just bass, but any other fish that you happen to hook on plugs, they're lethal. They can be lethal trebles, and they can do a fish a lot of damage. So there's one reason. And the second reason is, on the kayak, I like to net a decent fish in. Now I know out in the States they tend to use fish grips, and that's fine, but I like a net, and you get a fish hooked on plugs in the net and it's an absolute nightmare. The plugs get tangled in the net terribly, and an absolute nightmare to get the fish out and get the hooks out, particularly on one that you want to put back. And with the single hooks, I find that I don't get so much trouble with getting them tangled in the net. So there's the other reason. But like I said, it's very much a personal thing, and it's just the fact that I like to use singles now. Okay, so I hope that has answered 1 or 2 questions that I received about single hooks with regards to sizes. And we'll move on now and have a look at making up some soft plastics. Some weedless and some non-weedless, and some with jig heads and some without. Now of course we all have our favourite soft plastics, but this is just a little selection of the soft plastics I like to use for my bass fishing. Got the Fish Arrow J 5-inch SW, which is a lure that I featured in a video last year. I mainly only use this from the shore because it casts so well. Either fitted with a weighted weedless worm hook or a non-weighted weedless worm hook. Got the Savage Sandeel. This is the 10cm Savage Sandeel body with the 16-gram non-weedless jig head. Got exactly the same, but this time fitted with the Savage Sandeel weedless jig head. I'm tending more and more, because of the ground I fish over for bass, I'm tending more and more to use weedless rather than non-weedless. Got another great soft plastic, which is the Savage Sandeel Slug on the non-weedless 16 g jig head. Exactly the same with the weedless jig head. Got a 6-inch Slug-Go, which I tend to use non-weighted, just rigged with a Texposer hook, weedless, and maybe troll that from the kayak. And also the 6-inch Slug-Go rigged with the 16 grams jig head. So what we're going to do, I need to make some of the more of these up. So what we're going to look at is making up a few of them, putting the weighted weedless worm hook on the fish arrow, putting some jig heads on spare bodies of the 10 cm Savage Sandeel, and also putting the weedless jig heads on the Savage Sandeels and the Savage Sandeel Slugs. First thing I'm going to do is put a weighted weedless worm hook on this Fish Arrow J 5-inch SW. Now you can use a weighted weedless worm hook or a non-weighted weedless worm hook. The only difference I find is that with the weighted hook it works a little bit deeper. But basically this lure is a calm conditions lure, or moderate conditions. It's not a lure for using in rough conditions. Now the main thing with this lure as regards to the hook is because it's quite a wide bodied lure compared to, let's say, a worm such as a Savage Sandeel Slug or a Slug-Go, you need a wide gaped hook. That's really important. And the reason that's important is because when the fish bites down on the lure, there's plenty of hook point exposed to increase your hooking capabilities. Whereas if you used an ordinary weedless worm hook, more suitable for things like Slug-Gos, which are fairly narrow gape, there's not much hook exposed. So that's really important, a wide gape hook. This particular one is called a Mustad Power Lock. There's plenty of others on the market that are suitable. I can't think of the make of this one, but basically they're all similar. They've got these either screws like that or spikes like that one that push or screw into the nose of the lure to hold it in place. Now one little tip I can give you is what I find sometimes is if you just screw these little connections in or push these spikes in, when you're fishing they can pull out. So what I tend to do to give them extra holding power is use a dab of super glue. And in actual fact, super glue is a really good thing when you're working with weedless soft plastics and putting jig heads on, as we'll have a look later. As regards to the size of the hook for this lure, this is a 5/0. I found on this particular one you can use a 5/0 or a 6/0. 4/0 in my opinion would be too small. But what we're going to do here doesn't just apply to this particular lure. There's plenty of other soft plastics that are very similar to this, some with paddle tails that are quite fat bodied. So it applies a very similar way or the same way of putting a weedless hook on those lures as well. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to screw or push this locking device into the nose of the lure, and it's quite important to try and get it as central as you possibly can. But just before I push or screw it home completely, what I'm going to do is put that dab of super glue on, and like I said, I find that really helps stop it coming out when you're fishing, but not when you're fishing, when you're trying to actually push this hook through the body of the lure. So we've got a dab of super glue. Just going to pop that home, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave that to dry. Leave it for about 5 minutes to dry before I actually try and push this through the body of the lure. Because what I have found is that if you try and push this through the body of the lure, sometimes these spikes or screws tend to pull out a bit and it goes out of position. So the super glue also helps in that way. So we just leave that for 5 minutes to dry, and then we'll come back and then just position this hook to come out through the body and right through the centre of the top of the lure there. Okay, I've left it long enough for the super glue to set, and as you can see there, I'm pulling on that now, and that's a really solid hold on there. If I didn't have that super glue, that would pull out quite easily. So what we've got to do now is, by the way, if any of you noticed, well, he's got a plaster in this shot and didn't have a plaster in the previous shot. Well, I've just pricked myself with this hook, and things we have to do to get these videos out. Okay, so what I've got to do is, this is mainly for those of you that have never done this before, and I know those of you that have done this plenty of times, you know all about this, but this is mainly for people, and I get questions about this. What size hook should I use, etc., what type of hook, etc., etc. So it's mainly for you people that are fairly new to this, fairly new to rigging weedless hooks and soft plastics. So what we've got to try and do, we've got to try and push this hook up through the belly and out the centre of the top of the body there. And it's quite important to try and get it coming right at the top, out the centre. And in actual fact, there's a little groove there. You probably can't see it on camera. There's a little groove on the top of this lure, which is supposed to be where the hook is going to sit. And it's quite important that it enters the belly at the correct location. And the correct location, if I push the hook up to the belly, you can see where that bend is entering. This is going to be a little bit difficult trying to do it at this angle. I wouldn't normally bother with this, but what I'm going to do is, and it is quite a good idea, is actually mark the point where it's going to enter, which is about there. And that just gives me a guide then where to put the point of the hook into the belly. So we're just going to, and this is you notice here how I have to bend this hook, and if I didn't have the super glue here, that would start to pull out, and that's really annoying, I find. But with the super glue, it holds in, so we've got to push that hook at that point and try and get it as central as possible. And what I'm also trying to do, if I can get that right, is push that straight through, so not on an angle, so it comes straight through up through the centre of the lure. And this is actually this is the most difficult bit, is actually trying to get it central. And what I want it to do is come out through the centre, which I've just about done, like that. One other thing I need to mention about when you're using this lure and any other lure with the weighted weedless worm hooks that have got these spikes or screws that you push in the nose, because the spike or the screw goes through the eye of the hook, what that does, it makes the gap to put your hook link, your link to clip the lure on, very, very small. And if you try, as I found out, if you try to put sort of links that are quite wide in the metal, with a quite wide metal, through that, you can't get it through. There's not enough room. Now, these don't have that problem with plugs, but with this particular setup, it's a very, very, very small hole there. So what you've got to do, you've got to use very, very thin wired links, like that one. This one is called made by the company Delalandi. I can't think of the name of it, but it's available. It's a Delalandi something or other lure link, which is a great one, and that will go through the little hole there very, very easily. Other types are these little snap types, but again are very, very thin metal, and they're no problem going through the very, very tiny gap that you've got to clip this lure on. That's if you want to use a clip. The other alternative, of course, is just to tie it on, but I like to use a clip, because if you use a clip, it means you can very, very easily change lures if you want to. So that's just something else to be aware of if you're using these type of weedless worm hooks. Okay, so that's that with the weedless hook, but of course these soft plastics, you don't have to necessarily use them weedless. What you can do, if you don't want to use them weedless, the way to do it is just take a hook. This hook, I'll probably use a bigger hook, but this is just one hook I had to hand. And what you can do is just push it through the nose there and out the top, and again trying to keep it nice and central. And you can actually fish it like that. And this would be a good way of fishing it if you're drop shot fishing for bass on a drop shot rig, or just cast it out like that. If you don't particularly need to fish weedless, you can fish it that way. Okay, so we'll move on now and we'll look at fitting some jig heads to soft plastics. What I need to do now is make up some soft plastics with jig heads, both weedless and non-weedless. And in this case it's the 10 cm Savage Sandeel, which goes with the 16 gram Savage Sandeel jig head. Of course you can use other soft plastics and other jig heads. It doesn't really matter, whatever's your personal choice, but I quite like these as they sort of look like Sandeels, and Sandeels during the bass season is very much a natural food for the bass, so it's a good choice of lure. Now what I tend to use these lures for is when I'm drifting over the kayak over rough ground, fairly shallow rough ground, maybe up to 20, certainly 25 feet at the most. And then what I like to do is cast them from the kayak on the drift, and then either retrieve them back or jig them back, or a combination of retrieve and jig. And I find that method works really well. The first thing we're going to do is do the non-weedless one, which is the easiest one to do. And what I like to do is just line the lure up to roughly how it's going to sit, and then mark the top of the soft plastic where I want the hook point to come out. And that's just as a guide. So it's going to come out about there. And once again, it's quite important to try and get these to come right out the centre, so the centre, and also that it comes out at the right point through the centre and out the top. If it's too short and it's too long, then the soft plastic doesn't sit correctly. It doesn't sit nice and straight, and that's quite important. So in this case, it's just a matter of threading it. So remember, we want the hook point to come out the top of the body. So we don't thread it on that way where it would come out the belly. We thread it this way. And through the centre, and the Savage Sandeels, they have a hole there anyway to guide you, which is bang in the centre. And then we just basically need to thread it on as if you're threading on a worm, straight down the centre, and try and judge with that little mark that I made earlier, which is about there, making sure that it's coming out right in the centre. And then going back to the super glue, just to get an extra strong hold, before I push this home, is just to dab a bit of super glue on that little holding point there. And also I like to put it on the head of the soft plastic there. And then all I need to do then is just push it over the little holding hook, and then push it up there, and the super glue, which will set really quickly, and that's going to make it a much stronger hold. And as you can see there, because I've got it coming out at the right point, not too far back. If it's too far back, this would all be crooked, and not too far this way, and it just wouldn't sit right. And the most important thing is that it sits nice and straight, and it's coming nicely out the centre. So that's pretty straightforward to do. But again, this is for those of you that have never done it before. Those of you who have done it before will know what to do anyway. So that would apply to any soft plastic really that you want to fit onto this particular jig head or any other jig head. So that's that one done. Now the one that's a bit more complicated is the weedless. But with the weedless, what we don't do, we're not going to start by pushing it straight through this way. We've got to start by actually pushing the soft plastic on the jig head like that, and then just push it up. And then what we've got to do, similar as how we did the fish arrow, we then got to push it up through from the belly up through the centre of the lure and out the top of the lure. So you can see there's not a very strong hold. So if I just did that and then try to push it up, this is going to be all over the place. So once again, this is where the super glue is your best friend. So what we're going to do is put a bit of super glue on this hook that is designed to hold the soft plastic, and then push it on, and then push it up and leave it to set, and then come back and then try and push the hook through the center of the belly and out the top. So we're just going to put a dab of super glue on the head of the lure, and also on the hook that's designed to hold it. And then push that up, and then just hold it for a while, just to help it set snug up against the jig head. So we're just going to leave that to set for 5 minutes and then come back and then push the hook through the body. Okay, the super glue is set now, and as you can see there, I'm tugging that now, and that's made that much more solid. That's not given at all. Now if I didn't have the super glue, that would just pull straight off, and so this is going to make it a lot easier when I need to bend this up and push the hook through the belly and out the top of the lure, and also when it's going to stay together a lot better when you're actually fishing. So what I need to do there now is once again try and judge where to push the hook up just by lining the hook up, and it's roughly at that point where the bend of the shank there lines up with the body. In this case I can just use my thumb as a marker. And then what we just need to do is try and push that straight through the center and come out straight up through the center of the lure like that. And that's it. And once again, how it will work, the fish will just bite on it, and then the hook point will expose. And weedless are really great. I find weedless are really great. They really do cut down on tackle losses when you're fishing over rough ground, and I'm using them more since I started using weedless. Realised the benefits of it, and I'm using them more and more. And once you're confident that the hooking mechanism hooks the fish, when you first look at them, you think, oh, that's there. There's no point showing. A fish is going to come along. You're not going to hook it. But once you get confident that they do actually hook the fish well. Once you've got that confidence, I tend to use them more and more. Alright, so that's the weedless and non-weedless, and of course you can use these for different types of soft plastic. I've got one, as I showed you earlier, with the Slug-Go, which I use in exactly the same way. Cast it from the kayak on the drift and then jig it back, and that works really well. Savage Sandeel Slug is another one you could use, either weedless or non-weedless, and all of these work well. The last soft plastic I'm going to put together is the Slug-Go. This is a 6-inch Slug-Go. It's well known as a good bass lure, and they are absolutely brilliant. They're so flexible and so lifelike in the water, imitating the Sandeel. They really are great lures. And we're going to rig this non-weighted, and I'm going to rig it with a Texposer hook, which is designed to go with it. The company Lunker City make both of these, and this is called a Texposer hook. But there's plenty of other hooks that you can use that are similar to this, and they're perfectly fine for the Slug-Go and other soft plastics such as the Savage Sandeel Slug. Now, what I tend to use the Slug-Go for, I use it in different ways for bass. I sometimes use it trolling, non-weighted, just the weight of the hook and the weight of the lure, so it literally just trolls just under the surface. And what the bass will do, even if you're fishing in, say, 20 foot of water, they'll come up from underneath and hit it, thinking that it's a Sandeel. So what I like to do is like a slow troll, and sometimes with just a pause, so it just sinks down a little bit, and imitating a dead or an injured Sandeel. The other way I like to fish it is on a drop shot rig, and just jig it. So you would set this up, tie this on your trace with a drop shot knot, and then fish it that way. And then just lower it down and then just jig it, cast it out, lower it down and then jig it back to the kayak. And that's another way to fish it. And also I fish it sort of slight drop shot style for cod and pollock. Okay, so these are pretty straightforward to put together. This is a 4-0 Texposer hook, which is the right size for the 6-inch Slug-Go, as recommended by the company that made them. So straightforward to put together. All you need to do with this is push the point of the hook into the nose and just push it straight down, keeping it central until you get to that first bend. And then what you need to do is to come round and pull the hook, the point out through the centre of the belly. And again, as with all these things, try and keep it as central as you can. And once it comes out the belly, then you just push the hook down the shank, and then just as you get to this kinked bit, you turn it. And the reason you turn it before you push it over this kink bit is because we want the hook to come out of the centre of the belly and out the top of the lure. But once again, what I tend to like to do is take a bit of super glue and just dab a bit of super glue on that little kinked bit. You only need a little bit, and that really is going to help make this more of a solid hold. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to push that over that shank, and you can actually sink the eye. And all you do when you rig it is just pull that back a little bit to put your hook link on. And then what we've got to do is, with these Slug-Gos, they've got these little marks here, and that mark there is the perfect place for the 4-0 Slug-Go, 4-0 Texposer hook, designed for this size Slug-Go, to push up through. And then once again we just need to push that through there, the centre of the belly, and then try and make sure that it comes out right through the centre of the top of the lure like that. And then what that will do, that will make sure that it sits lovely and straight like that. So it's as simple as that. So that's the Slug-Go. And of course you can do exactly the same thing if you were fishing maybe Savage Sandeel Slugs, which are also great lures. Just rig them. You can rig them either with a jig head or in exactly the same way if you're going to fish it non-weighted, either on a drop shot rig or just troll it in the kayak. Okay, got a good selection of lures ready now for the new bass fishing season, and the plan this season is to make a few more bass fishing videos, maybe some trolling and drifting using a variety of lures, and hopefully you'll see some of these lures actually catching bass. So for those of you that are interested in using singles instead of trebles on plugs, I hope that answered one or two questions. And also for those of you that are fairly new to lure fishing, I hope you found that useful. So once again, many thanks for watching.